The bright side of addiction is recovery. If you're in recovery or know someone or love someone who is, or maybe you simply want to know more about the recovery process, or maybe you're just a bit concerned about someone's use of alcohol or other drugs, this is a podcast for you. You can find all our podcasts, by the way, at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And another reminder, September's coming up, National Recovery Month. You can find out what events are happening in your community by going to nationalrecoverymonth.org. They do this every September around the country, and this year's theme is Recovery is for Everyone. Every person, every family, every community. Remember, recovery is living proof. You know, I love to read, and one of my favorite authors is the very prolific Lamott. Now, a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of having her in our iHeart studios to talk about her writing and her recovery. We're going to dip into the audio archives and share that poignant interview. Here's a quick preview of what's coming up in the podcast.
There's no way I would have kept on living that I can see in 1986. I was just going down the tubes. Somebody once in recovery said the greatest line to me 20-some years ago. He said, at the end, I was deteriorating faster than I could lower my standards. Oh. Isn't that an amazing line? And because up until then, you just keep rewriting the reality and making it seem not all that bad and setting lower and lower standards. And then when you don't meet them, you just kind of write a new position paper. And finally, you get to the point where no one's listening, no one's co-signing it, and you can't even co-sign your own line anymore. The first 6 months were very hard for me. I didn't want to be sober. I just thought I just don't want to die.
After we talk to Lamott, we're going to share something that a previous guest recently sent me. His name is Brian D., and it's called The ABCs of AA. I think you might enjoy it. And we'll close out the podcast with some reflections on forgiveness from another outstanding woman in recovery, the multi-talented actress Ali McGraw. Recovery is as recovery does. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, the website recoverycoasttocoast.org. Following 15 years of nightly broadcasting on iHeartRadio in Seattle, we now have upgraded to a national podcast available to anyone at any time, featuring interviews with everyday people in long-term recovery, as well as clinicians and authors, researchers, recovering celebrities, and newsmakers, all who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery. Plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy the podcast and share it with your friends as well. Recovery is an American way of life. A reminder again, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast supported by Sundown M Ranch. Admitting yourself or someone you love to an addiction treatment program can be very difficult and highly emotional. At Sundown, they know that, and they understand the chaos and confusion, and they provide respect, empathy, kindness, and compassion to make that process as gentle and as smooth as possible. Treatment at Sundown is abstinence-based and 12-step centered. They provided an array of services including detox, education, individual therapy, group therapy, medical services, exercise, chaplain services, and a comprehensive family program, which frankly is one of the best in the country, plus an all-embracing continuing care program. They don't just treat and release. Recovery from addiction is a long-term process, with the treatment phase just the beginning of the journey. Once a patient leaves Sundown, they're given a proverbial toolkit individually designed to help maintain long-term recovery. And if you're concerned about an adolescent, they have an amazing and highly successful treatment program utilizing a multidisciplinary team of certified and highly trained counselors and medical professionals who are fully committed to the highest quality of adolescent treatment at the most affordable price. And make no mistake, these are well-trained and deeply caring, experienced professionals. When you get a chance, even if you're not looking for treatment right now, take a look at their website. I think you'll be impressed. Sundown.org. You'll find a lot more information there on both adolescent treatment and adult treatment as well. Sundown has been successfully treating adults, adolescents, and their families since way back in 1968, nearly 55 years. It's where recovery begins. A few years ago, when we had our nightly radio show on iHeartRadio in Seattle, New York Times bestselling author Anne Lamott stopped by our studios while on a book tour. Her insight into life, spirituality, and one day at a time recovery is breathtaking. She talks about one of her favorite tools for recovery. It's called the God Box. Also, she talks about when she was destitute and found redemption, how rigorous honesty was essential to her recovery, and how grace is, according to Anne, her spiritual WD-40. Now, most of Anne's family is now in recovery as well, which is a miracle. It's a family disease. Hers is a story of a family recovery. And now, here's that interview with the wonderful Anne Lamott from the Recovery Coast to Coast audio archives. Welcome back once again to Recovery Coast to Coast, the only program in America on the air 5 nights a week, 2 hours a night, talking about addiction with a focus on recovery. We are delighted to welcome back New York Times best-selling author Anne Lamott, whose latest book is called Some Assembly Required, a book lovingly written with her son Sam. It's a journal of her son's first son, Jax, in his first year of life. Anne was on Recovery Coast to Coast about 5 years ago. She's the author of 5 books of nonfiction, including the wonderful book Bird by Bird, Instructions on Writing and Life. She's also written 7 novels, including Imperfect Birds, about a teenager and a family dealing with alcoholism. Anne is a person in long-term recovery for over 25 years. I finished Some Assembly Required late last night and feel like I've been living in the life and the loves of Anne for the past couple of weeks. The book takes the reader on a 1-year journey from the birth of her grandson Jax through his first birthday. It's a book about his life, about her life, life and death, as she deals also with the loss of her beloved Uncle Millard. She also takes you on a spiritual journey over to India and an insightful trip to Europe. It's a book about love and friendship, about family and self. It's about wonder and doubt. It's about coming of age. It is written with rigorous honesty and raw honesty that I found to be breathtaking. Anne Lamott, welcome back to Recovery Coast to Coast. Great to finally meet you in person.
Thank you.
You wrote the book with your son, Sam. When and how did you decide to write the book?
Well, he was actually the reason that the book got written at all, because my editor asked if I wanted to write a sequel to Operating Instructions, and I said I thought it would be exploitive. My editor said, not if you didn't exploit anyone. So I said, well, I'll ask Sam. And as you know from the preface, Sam just totally wanted to give something like Operating Instructions to his own son.
You were not thrilled to learn of Amy's pregnancy, as your son obviously was very young, unmarried, and I quote a passage in the book, I knew what Sam was in for. It was like a terminal illness, but in a good way.
Yeah. Raising kids is the hard, or being the aunt and uncle to kids that you're responsible for. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to do. And he was 19, a full-time student in art design. And if I were God's West Coast representative, I would have argued to hold off for a little while.
Following the birth, there was some great concern on your part that Amy would take your grandson and move back to North Carolina to live with her parents. You seem to employ every manipulative trick imaginable to keep this from happening. You also used a God box, which I found fascinating, a mail drop to God. Tell me about the God box and how that works.
Well, I think I first wrote about it in Traveling Mercies because it's been such a tool of my recovery. When I don't know what to do, I don't know what the right decision is, I haven't really heard back from some sort of Holy Spirit or, gotten the email from God saying, I think not this time, or yeah, go for it. I just write a note with 1 or 2 words on it, and I fold it up, and I say to God something like, I'm keeping my sticky fingers off the controls of this till I hear from you, and I let it go. It's a visible and tangible way for me to see that I really am letting go.
New York Times bestselling author Anne Lamott joining us tonight on Recovery Coast to Coast. Her latest book is Some Assembly Required, co-written with her son Sam, published by Riverhead Books and available at independent bookstores throughout the country. We urge you to support them. And if you must, it's also available online at the usual outlets, including Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. You can also follow Anne on Facebook and Twitter as well. You lean on many friends during this special year, including Father Tom, the Jesuit priest, and a dear friend, Bonnie, who seems to always offer sage advice and counsel to you. Talk about the importance of the deep personal friendships in your life.
Well, I really honestly think that the reason I have such a deep religious faith is because of the quality of my friends who have been the same people for 25 years. I got sober almost 26 years ago, and Tom Weston is just the most hilarious and sort of acerbic, very spiritually wise guy. And I often call him, we talk almost every day, or he calls me and to announce that it's all hopeless. And then I have a mentor. I always call her Horrible Bonnie because she always just has such a beautiful, beautiful spiritual take on things. Like the thing in some assembly I mention a lot is that she'll say, "Oh, I think something beautiful is being revealed," when I just think everything's horrible. And I'll say, "Oh, what? What do you think's being revealed?" And she'll say, "Well, the truth." So then I say, "I'm not calling you again." She says, "Okay, darling, I'll be up till midnight."
Your church, St. Andrew, is a central part of your life and your son's life as well, and it feels like such a center of spirituality. You share a sermon that defines sin as separation, which reminded you of a favorite line, "We aren't a drop in the ocean, but we are the ocean in drops." What does that mean to you?
Well, first, I guess what it means to me is that I have a really mystical, if unformed, sense of the spiritual, that it's really, we're not we're not just who our parents told us we were, which was that we were students and that we were going to have to grow up and get a job and that we were a part of the whole, but rather we're just we're like maybe in the Jewish tradition of tikkun, that the sense that we're all shards of light and that we're trying to be a bigger piece of light, so that for this very cold and dark world. And so I feel that my spirituality is based on the fact that I think we're made out of the same stuff as God, and we're made for only one purpose, which is to love, and we're made of love. I have a friend, Marianne, who once said, "We're made of the same stuff that Jesus was made of, but he didn't have all this extra stuff." And on bad days, you just feel like you're nothing but the extra stuff.
Sam has some wonderful, insightful, and very poignant comments and interviews that you did with him throughout the year, including writing of feeling like a taxi driver, trying to get God from place to place, and how being a dad is like being in the Secret Service. His job is to protect his kid and his destiny. Sam's a great dad.
Well, Sam's a really sweet guy. He was on tour with me last week on the East Coast, and it was really fun because it's just such a trip to get to mentor someone, and for somebody to be willing for you to mentor them. And he's a good guy. He said something I love in this book, too, which was that becoming a father helped him understand how his Heavenly Father felt about him, just how passionate and protective, and because he knows his own father, who he didn't meet till he was 7, loves him that way. But it was really having his own baby that taught him about his Heavenly Father.
No photos in the book. By design, and what went into that decision?
There's no photos and operating instructions except for Sam on the cover, then that little Mervyn's tiger suit. But you try to find the balance between being sure that everybody's good with the material. I gave Amy, Jax's mother, and Sam many opportunities to comb through and find anything mostly not that they didn't want me to share, because I'm very, very, very careful about not sharing my family's intimate stuff, but stuff that they thought I got wrong. I gave them a chance to edit it, or to try to convince me to edit it. So, but I always felt protective of Sam's image. There's not a lot of pictures of him out in the world being a young guy. And I feel the same way about Jax.
New York Times bestselling author Anne Lamott joining us tonight for a few moments on Recovery Coast to Coast. Her latest book is Some Assembly Required, co-written with her son Sam, and again published by Riverhead Books, available at independent bookstores. You can also get it online, obviously, at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. I was touched by a letter that you wrote to Jax following his first Thanksgiving. Did you write other letters to him?
No, just in my head. But I felt like the distillation of all the wisdom I've been able to gather here in almost 58 years is that everybody thinks they missed the day in school when the instructions were handed out about how to have really good self-esteem and just feel really positive about yourself and trustful of God and of goodness. And that everybody thinks that was the day they had strep, or the head cold, and so that everybody else has that information. And the fact is, no one has that information. If you're lucky, especially if you're a person in recovery, you may have found a community, a little path that you were looking for your whole life, a little light to see by. But mostly the common shared experience of being human is that we think everybody else knows something that we don't know.
Tell me about Bill Rankin, the Episcopal priest who was instrumental in your recovery some 25 plus years ago.
Yeah, Bill Rankin. Well, I had grown up at this, running off to this funny little church because my parents were atheists and we weren't supposed to have thoughts about God. But I found a Catholic family and a Christian Science family to be very, very close to because they read Scripture and they prayed and they loved Mary. And I'm one of those Protestant girls who really loves Mary. And you can see I'm wearing her around my neck.
Yes, I do.
And then St. Stephen's was a church another friend went to, and my mom would go there for midnight mass on Christmas. So it was all, and I went to Sunday school there kind of secretly when I was a child. And then when I was 32 and really crashing and burning behind alcohol and drug addiction, I had heard that there was this very profound new guy there who was taking the congregation in really new directions, such as, really ministering to the poor. It was a very wealthy church, and he was kind of radicalizing them in that sense that the main goal and the only thing that would fill them would be ministering to the poor and the homeless but I called him and I said, I kind of need to talk to somebody. He said, well, I can't be here, I have a meeting, but come in tomorrow. And I said, okay, but it was clear. And he said, never mind, I'll just cancel it. And he didn't know me from Adam's house cat, and he said, can you get here? Well, I didn't have a car because I was in blackouts a lot. And so I said, I can walk there in an hour. And I walked as fast as I could. This guy doesn't drink or not drink. I mean, to me, that makes no sense at all. But I've seen him have a beer in 25 years, maybe most of a beer 4 times. It just doesn't occur to him to drink, his body weight in hard alcohol. So anyway, I went in and he just said a couple of very profound things to me that I said, I don't even feel that God could love me at this point because I'm living so bizarrely. And he said, God has to love you. That's his job. And then, and that really changed my life. And then he said, I think it's really important you take yourself off the hook, put Jesus up on the hook where he belongs and wants to be. And I didn't even really quite know what that meant, but I thought, okay, because I'd run out of good ideas.
Did you go through treatment or just into the rooms, or what was it like?
I just did it the way that you do it when you don't have any money. I was absolutely destitute and really was until I'd been sober about, I think 3 or 4 years, and I had another book. My first sober book came out 3 years into my sobriety, but I just did what you do. I prayed and people, women, helped me not pick up a drink one day at a time. I mean, what a concept. And then all of a sudden, time had passed, and I had fallen in love with sobriety.
You write in the book about your visit to Auschwitz. I visited Dachau a number of years ago, and it was so moving. I can still hear the silence. Yeah. And I picked up some rocks there that are still on my desk at home. How did that visit affect you, Annie?
Well, it was just it's so stunning and huger than anything you could ever experience before. That it like Elie Wiesel said, the only proper response is silence to the crematoriums and the quote unquote hospital rooms. But I went there just last year with Father Tom, or 2 years ago. Jax was coming up on his 1-year birthday, and I hadn't really planned it. We went with a bunch of sober people, and I hadn't really planned on having a grandson by then. And so the first thing when you walk in to the concentration camp was a little kid's shoes hanging over the sign to where the shoe drop-off was. And from that point on, all I could do, and I wrote about this in depth in some assembly, I just had to keep moving. Yeah. I heard in recovery, take the action and the insight will follow. And because I didn't have anything to go on, I just kept walking. I paid attention. I stayed close to a couple other sober people, and I got through it. And then the insight followed, which is, like Tom Weston said, that we're a dangerous species and that Cain is still killing Abel. And that those of us that can go someplace like that and come back and bear witness need to do that so it doesn't ever happen again.
New York Times bestselling author Anne Lamott joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast, the latest book, Some Assembly Required. It's co-written by her son, Sam. It is your latest book, Anne, but each book has a rather extended gestation period. The book chronicles the time between July of 2009 and July of 2010. Is it hard to shift back to promoting this book when you're probably working on new writing projects? In fact, what is Annie Lamott working on today?
Well, I just have to say, I want to clear up any misbelief that I really enjoy writing or can't wait to get to it, because I'm just like everybody, and I'm especially like every alcoholic I've ever known, which is that I have equal proportions of narcissism and terrible self-esteem. So when I have finished a book, this book that was published March 20th was probably finished and into production by October. So there's a good 6 months lead time. And that's where, if you're not careful, you just go nuts. So I always have a project going. And what I had really wanted to do was to put together some of the pieces on grief that I've written over the years, beginning with, there's operating instructions when my best friend dies, and traveling mercies. And the pieces on grief seem to really speak to people, because the culture is so adamant that you not grieve in public, and you not really grieve for all that long, and that you try to do it in some neat, organized way. And grief is messy, and grief might take the rest of your life, and it might be that your heart is injured forever, and you might be that's what you choose because your heart's open finally. So I'm always having this idea that I've been given a gift, and that I need to share it to keep it. I mean, where that comes from. And so I have had a number of very grief-filled experiences, but they sometimes when I write them, they come out really funny, or they come out sweet, or they come out being about grace, which is maybe spiritual WD-40 or something. So I just keep thinking I'm writing. I forgot what the subtitle is, but it's like new and collected pieces on just coming through.
Just coming through
together.
Sam speaks so lovingly about your brother, who is also in recovery, and it's so wonderful to read Sam's deep love and respect for his uncle.
He adores his uncle. My younger brother, Steve-O. My whole family's in recovery. We are just such drunks. Oh, yeah.
That's wonderful.
We're just such drunks and drug addicts. Well, both my brothers, and a couple of my cousins, and Sam, and I don't know. We just came this way. There's something wrong with us. Sam always says, we don't seem to have any off switches in this family. But Sam loves my younger brother, who really was sort of his surrogate father all those years. Steve-O is the person I'm closest to, and so he was around all the time. I love the stuff that Sam wrote about Steve-O's wedding. I would say that great. And the stuff Sam wrote about his own father is the most touching stuff for me.
Indeed. How has your recovery enhanced your life, your love, your spirituality, your writing? I'm sure it gets better each day.
I wouldn't be alive. There's no way I would have kept on living that I can see in 1986. I was just going down the tubes, and somebody once in recovery said the greatest line to me 20-some years ago. He said, at the end, I was deteriorating faster than I could lower my standards. Isn't that an amazing line? And because up until then, you just keep rewriting the reality and making it seem not all that bad, and setting lower and lower standards. And then when you don't meet them, you just kind of write a new position paper. And finally, you get to the point where no one's listening, no one's co-signing it, and you can't even co-sign your own line anymore. So the first 6 months were very hard for me. I didn't want to be sober. I just thought I just don't want to die. I think I'll have 6 nice months of recovery, and then I'll start smoking dope and smoking marijuana, and that will be fine, and that will not make me feel like using harder drugs or drinking, and then that will be fine, and I won't have to be with all these awful people with their bad coffee and their little slogans. And then I fell in love, and it was the same with Jesus. I absolutely did not intend to do that. I intended to do the opposite. And little by little, that much love and that much compassion and outreach, it just hooks you in, and then you become kind of addicted to that way of life, of service, and of how people always say, we're going to love you till you can love yourself. I thought, I've been looking for these people all my life.
Yeah.
So I've stuck around.
And it's about making it better. We hear the term relapse prevention.
Yeah.
I don't like to use that. I like to use the term recovery enhancement.
Yeah.
Because every day you should be working on getting better. Just as addiction is progressive in a negative sense, your recovery should be progressive in a positive sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mentioned earlier in the book that it is full of rigorous honesty, and I was deeply moved by your writing on June 9th. You were invited to speak at a book festival in Chicago, and Amy had arranged for several relatives and friends to attend, and she wanted everyone to be a big, happy family. Now, at that point, Amy was still considering moving away to the Bay Area, away from you, and you, however, saw that Chicago meeting a little differently, writing, "I pretend to think and want this as well, but I secretly hope that instead they will see what a fabulous person I am and will not want Amy to take Jax away from me." How profound and how incredibly honest to be able to put that out there.
Well, it's, what happens after you've been sober a little bit is that you learn the gift of gently busting yourself, because if you're in lie or if you're in just conning yourself, then you can't really, it hurts your conscious contact with God. And so as long as I can be clear and honest with God and say, I get what I'm up to here, then I know that God doesn't say, well, just stop that. Just that God goes, you know what, I get it. I got it. And then I can choose to maybe be a little bit more honest in the way I am in the world.
What was the reaction to the book from Amy, from friends, relatives when they read it?
Well, Amy's been reading it all along, so she's been reading it since Jax was born, and I've been interviewing her and asking her for memories and her advice and stuff. But everyone just loves it for the same reason they loved Operating Instructions, because it's just a book about love. It's a book about salvation and where we look for that and where we actually find it, and living one day at a time, and how grace doesn't, grace finds us right where we are. And you think, well, this can't be enough, and then it always is.
New York Times bestselling author Annie Lamott joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast. The latest book is called Some Assembly Required. Near the end of the book, and you write, with your own child, you're fixated on the foreground, trying to keep your child safe and alive. But with a grandchild, you can be a softer focus. You can see beyond the anxious foreground.
Yes.
That's what being a grandparent is all about.
Well, for a lot of us, I've been traveling for a couple of weeks promoting this book, and I've been really finding a lot of grandparents whose kids took the grandchildren away from them to punish, or because people are using and drinking, or they don't want. And so there's just a whole range of experiences. But for most people with our kids, we really were so fixated. How are they doing? How are they turning out? Should they do this? Wouldn't it be great if they did that? Or we don't want them to do that, and this and that. Turns out you're really pretty much in charge of what's inside your own hula hoop, and kids become who they were born to be, like we did. And but with a grandchild, you don't ever think, oh, I wonder if this would be good. I wonder if he needs to do that. You just adore him.
Yeah. You write with such truth. When I finish most books, it's usually with a degree of sadness, having to say goodbye to characters that I've just left. In this case, finding Some Assembly Required, finishing it last night, I feel like I'm saying hello to a new friend. I am hoping that we can meet again, either in person or by phone, and to talk a little more extensively about recovery, about spirituality, about the wonderful maze that is life. Anne Lamott, author of Some Assembly Required, joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast.
Special thanks to New York Times bestselling author Anne Lamott. By the way, I just want to remind listeners of this podcast that if you'd like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you've chosen, as long as you have been in continuous recovery for at least a year or more, drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. At the beginning of the podcast, I mentioned one of our listeners, Brian D. Actually, he was a guest on Recovery Coast to Coast. Brian sent me an email that contained a reading that he did on the ABCs of AA. I think you might enjoy it. Here's Brian D.
A is for alcohol, my most deadly foe. B is for the bottle, to which I say no. C is for the control I no longer possess, and D is for the first drink that can start a hell of a mess. E is for the effort I make just for today, and F is for the fellowship I find here in AA. G is for the group that I rely on for aid, and H is for the honesty I find here displayed. I is for the indifference I can no longer afford, and J is for the jag that may come when I get bored. K is for the knowledge that all of us need, and L is for the new lives it allows us to lead. M is for the meetings we should always attend, and N is for the newcomer whose life we may mend. O is for the old ways we've now thrown away. P is for the power which we rely on, just for today. Q is for worries and qualms, and R is for the replies that can quell my alarms. S is for the steps that show me the way. T for the traditions that I try to obey. U is for the urge to do useful things. And V is for the virtue that sobriety brings. W is for the wisdom to seek, not for fame. And X, Y, or Z is my anonymous name.
In just 30 seconds, we'll hear from legendary actress Ally McGraw, who will share her reflections on forgiveness. That's coming up. Stay with us.
Alcohol is running your life. You want help, but can't take time away from work to get it. Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown M Ranch outpatient programs have helped thousands recover from addiction without losing time on the job. Nationally recognized for innovative, effective, and affordable treatment programs, Sundown M Ranch will help you put your life back on track. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
Here now is award-winning actress Ally McGraw, a person in long-term recovery, reflecting on forgiveness.
When we first tapped into the power of forgiveness, we saw its value in only limited ways. Certainly it helped us to get over our hurt feelings, kept us from developing resentments, and brought us back to a peaceful frame of mind. In short, forgiveness did what we had been promised it would. We have since come to know a lot more about forgiveness. We see it not simply as an isolated act taken to achieve a specific purpose, but as a new consciousness of sorts, a spiritual approach to living that allows us to coexist peacefully with everything and everyone. When we live in a spirit of forgiveness, it becomes possible to recognize ourselves in people who have harmed us, and to acknowledge that we are capable of committing the very same wrongs. We can more easily understand that such people may be spiritually or emotionally off balance, that they are doing the best they can based on the circumstances of their life experiences. As forgiving people, we offer not only pardon to those who wrong us, but also kindness, compassion, and generosity of spirit. Thought for today: I will try to live in the spirit of forgiveness.
Well, that wraps up this edition of the national podcast, Recovery Coast to Coast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, by golly, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And let us know where you're listening from. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. Let us know what you like about the podcast and what you don't like. That really helps us to carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery, especially on social media. And another reminder, September coming up, National Recovery Month. You can find out what events are happening in your community by going to nationalrecoverymonth.org. They do this every September around the country, and this year's theme is Recovery is for everyone, every person, every family, every community. And remember, if you know someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's the 24-hour national helpline. It offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals, they are available as well. 1-800-622-HELP. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another quick shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch. You can find them at sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.